This video is going to show the timer functions, or the different time functions in App Lab. So I'm just going to start a new project here. I'm going to rename it Time. And the first thing I'm going to do on screen one, just save first, in design mode, I'm just going to put a label here. I'm not going to do a whole lot with the label. I'm going to make it a little bigger with something I want to do with it. But have it here, and I'm going to set up the text to start out as App Lab Time Functions. I think I want to center it, so I'll just scroll down here and center. So that's going to be my first page, and I'm actually going to go and code that now. So basically, I want to first show you the set timeout function. So I am going to click on Control, and all of my time functions are here at the bottom. So set timeout, and I'm going to pull this out. I could also type it in. This is what it looks like if you typed it. Set timeout is going to do something after a certain number of milliseconds. So right now it's set to 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds. And I actually want to set the property. And this is in my UI controls. I just want to show you that after certain amounts of time or when certain things happen, you can change properties of your elements. So I'm using this one, set property. I want to set the property for the ID of label 1. Okay, I didn't bother naming this label because I'm not really going to do a lot with it, so I just left it as label 1. And I want to change the font size. And I just want to show you a lot of these. I mean, we went through this quickly. You might not remember all of the different properties you can change. On any of the blocks, you can click on See Examples. So I actually didn't remember this one either. And I scrolled down. I knew I wanted to change the font, and that's called font size with a hyphen. So I'm going to change the font size to 24. Okay, so let's just see what happens here when I run. Okay, so I probably need to change the size of this. And just to comment on the create task, what I'm doing here where I write a little bit and then I test it, that's part of that incremental piece. The iterative piece, now I'm going back to fix this label size so that when I make the font grow, this label is going to be big enough. Okay, so that's iterative, right? Make something, I test it, I fix it, I test it again, kind of back and forth. So see, that grows after 1 second. So I also want to do something similar where I want to go to a different screen. So the next thing I need to do actually, I'll do this first. I'll write the code for it. And actually after 3 seconds, so that's starting from, we have 1 second on the top, that's 3 seconds including that 1 second. So I'm going to do 3,000 here. I want to do set screen and go to, I'm going to call it screen 2. Okay, so I have to put it in screen 2 right now. I can't run that. So in my design, new screen, we just have screen 2. And I actually have specific elements that I want in screen 2. So I want a label, and I'm not going to make these fancy, a text input, and then I want a button, and then I'm going to have 2 more labels, and then a button. So for my first text, I just want to write enter, put it down here, enter a time in seconds, and I'm going to call this directions label or something like that. And see that I need to resize this. I can do that from the options over here with height, but I usually just like to drag it and make it a different size. It's not working so well now, so we'll pick it up, move it over, and then drag it to make it bigger. Come on, there we go. Okay. So down here, I'm going to call this seconds input. That's fine. I could just have it that way. And then this is going to be just a button, enter button. I could call it like enter time button. I'm just going to give the text enter. So down here, this is just going to say timer. So I have timer label. This is going to be seconds label. Basically, that's going to display the time that's left. So we're going to start it off just with 0 for now. Okay, and I'm just going to drag this over a little bit so it's a little more centered. As I said, I'm not too worried about that now. And then my last button is just going to be start button and start. We're going to put right there. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to put these different directions or different component names because that usually helps me to code. Typed in these component names up here and just makes it faster. I'm going to run because now I should see after those 3 seconds switching over to screen 2. I'm just going to pause. So I forgot to type screen 2 in as a string. So we'll just test it one more time. And then we see it goes over to screen 2. So I have 2 of these set timeout functions first. Now we're going to start to code for the timer. So basically what I want to do here, I want to enter some sort of time in seconds here and then press this enter button. So I'm going to pull in a on event. So if I look up at my different choices, this is the enter button. So when the enter button's clicked, we're going to get the text from the seconds input. And I'm going to set this equal to a variable, which is time. So time, this new time variable is get text from whatever I inputted in here. So the next thing I want to do is set the text of this 0, which I called my seconds label. Not the best descriptions with timer and seconds, but I did make it seconds label. So set the text of, I can also click it here, seconds label. Sometimes that comes up, sometimes that doesn't, to time. So I'm going to put the time in here, okay? And then we're going to work from there. So let's just reset. It's a good time to check. This grows, switches to the next screen. When I type in seconds, let's do 10. I see that 10's down here. So that looks like I have a design issue. I'm going to go over to my design in screen 2. And I just need to make this a little bigger, especially a little longer to fit in those time. I'm not super worried about running that again. I'm pretty sure it's working fine, so I'm just going to leave it like that. We'll test it on the next run through. So basically the next thing that we want to happen, and let's just look at screen 2 so we can think about it. When we click this start button, we want this timer to count down. So this starts to get a little bit complex. So I'm going to pull in an on event. And this is when we click the start button. So the first thing that I want to happen is I want to use this timed loop function. So this is our second one we're going to use. Really the set timeout, the timed loop, and the stop time loop are the main 3 that I'm going to show you. So I'm going to pull in this, and what this is going to do is, if we did this in App Inventor as well, it kind of counts every second. So each second it's running some sort of loop. So this means each second I could make it faster, I could make it slower. If you're making some sort of game and you want like enemies to appear at a certain time, like anything that you want to time happen repeatedly is in this timed loop. So with this timed loop, each time this goes, I want the timer to count down. So I'm going to do time equals time minus 1. I could also increment it with like the minus minus would be fine too. So now each time I make it go down, I want to reset this, okay? So goes down, reset the text of this 0 right here. So why don't we try it from there and see what happens? So why don't we try 8 seconds, enter, the 8 comes down, and when I press my start button, okay, I can see it counting down. Now something we have to consider, right, it doesn't know that it would stop at 0, so you're gonna start to see that it counts into the negatives. So that's our last thing that we have to deal with, okay? So basically, underneath here, we can also run so that after a certain amount of time, right, just like after a certain amount of time it switched screens, after a certain amount of time, I want that to stop. So after a certain amount of time, we're going to stop the timed loop. So that's going to stop this loop from running. And I know this is kind of weird because when I look at this, I might think that it just stays in the timed loop and it doesn't get down to this part, but it actually does run through the whole thing just the way it's made. So it will check this timeout function even though it's kind of lower in the code. So we're going to stop the timed loop there. Okay, so let's run this and try it. We'll try 5 seconds. Brings it down here, press the start button. Okay, so if you see it stopped here. So the question is, why did it stop there? That's because I have my set timeout function after 1 second. So that's another thing I noticed. What I need to do is I want this to be equal to whatever time was entered up here. So it's going to be time times the 1,000 meaning 1 second or 1,000 milliseconds. So let's try it again. Start. Okay, and you see now it stops at 0. So just a couple of comments about this program. When we talk about mathematical or logical concepts, this time changing could be considered a mathematical concept. Okay, I don't have a lot of functions in this program. As I said, this one was more focused on just showing you how the time functions work. But this could definitely be considered an algorithm. It doesn't really have anything else, but any sort of sequence of directions that's decently long, you know, more than 2 lines of code is considered an algorithm. Even if you wanted to consider all this in a row, that could also be considered an algorithm. My time variable, if I wrote about this, is really my only example of abstraction I could use because each of these set timeout and on event functions are built into the program, so I couldn't use them as abstractions. I definitely, hopefully you saw my incremental and iterative development process. I kind of figured out the difficulties quickly, but you saw that I had some difficulties. I had to go back and fix things. I did have opportunities, but I figured them out already before. Right, like adding a timer label or adding the start button, just different little things I came up with when I was thinking about making the program, but I had already kind of done those before I showed you.